Right, we're going to start. My name's Zara Kimpton, and on behalf of the Australian Institute of International Affairs, I'd like to welcome you all here today to this year's national conference, which is on the topic Australian Foreign Policy, Regional or Global. We're delighted to welcome to this opening session the Honourable Julie Bishop, Minister for Foreign Affairs, the Honourable Tanya Plibersek, Shadow Minister for Foreign Affairs, and our outgoing National President, John McCarthy, who's stepping down after 5 years. However, I am delighted to announce, what some of you will have already read in the paper today, that the Honourable Kim Beazley has agreed to succeed John when he returns from Washington early in the new year. John will speak more about Kim later in this session. We're also very pleased to have in today's audience the Deputy Foreign Minister of the Czech Republic and ambassadors and high commissioners from 16 countries, many of whom were also here last year. We also welcome all those all those who will contribute to today's 4 sessions. We're grateful for the time that they have spent in travelling and preparing their contributions. The AIIA is fortunate to receive an annual grant from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, including for this conference, and we're pleased that a number of representatives from the Public Diplomacy Division are with us here today. DFAT is also funding 8 future diplomats from its graduate training program to attend today's conference. And of course, we mustn't forget our members. The AIIA is the only membership-based organisation in our field with branches in all state capitals and the ACT. We currently have 1,400 members, and I'm pleased to see that every branch is represented in today's audience. Today's conference also follows our series of masterclasses, which took place yesterday at the DFAT Civic Office. 80 of our young members from all around the country were privileged to hear and interact with 7 of our fellows. These classes could not have happened without the expertise of these fellows, and we welcome most of them here today after they so generously gave their time yesterday. A workshop to help aspiring young authors have their work published was also organised by conference sponsor Taylor & Francis, which is the publisher of our highly rated Australian Journal of International Affairs. All of these young people are here today, and we look forward to their probing questions. In 2013, we decided to hold a national conference to mark the 80th anniversary of the creation of the Australian Institute of International Affairs as a national organisation. Since our 2014 conference, both AIIA New South Wales and Victoria have celebrated the 90th anniversary of both their creation as branches of Chatham House, and we congratulate them both on this important milestone. The conferences held in the last 2 years were so successful that John McCarthy was keen for us to make this an important event for all those interested in international relations. We are thrilled to report that in the first year we had 150 people attending, last year 185, and as you can see, this year we're expecting more than 350 people. Each year the topic has been different, and I must say there was quite some debate amongst the organising committee as to whether our topic should focus on our own backyard or look further afield. This is reflected in the question inherent in the title, Regional or Global. I think since the decision was made some months ago, it's become even more apparent that it is an apt topic to debate the possible outcomes of current events. One of our fellows, Tony Walker, wrote in a recent article in the Financial Review about the Middle East that Washington's dilemma and that of its allies, including Australia, is excruciating and arguably involves one of the most complex national security conundrums of the modern era. The stakes could hardly be higher. We also look forward today to hear more of Australia's recent negotiations for preferential trade deals with 3 countries, as well as the recently concluded TPP negotiations, which still requires ratification by many countries, and there could be hiccups along the way. So although we no longer hold a seat on the UN Security Council or are hosting the G20, there's still a lot happening in our world. Today's conference will involve 4 sessions concentrating on foreign policy, enhancing prosperity, strengthening security, and finally contributing to global issues. At the end, we look forward to Ewan Crone announcing the winners of this year's Ewan Crone Asian Awareness Scholarships. These scholarships are the result of Ewan's magnificent generosity for the benefit of young members of AIIA across the country. At the same time, this year's winners of the Young Diplomats Programme will also be announced. We're delighted that besides Taylor and Francis, which I've already mentioned, we have two new sponsors. Northrop Grumman is kindly sponsoring the security session, which is a topic close to its heart, and Campaign for Australian Aid, which is a coalition of Australian NGOs advocating for greater investment in international development, and they are sponsoring the Global Issues session. You will find out more about these sponsors from their stalls in the foyer. So I'd now like to welcome John McCarthy, who's just stepping down after 5 years as National President of the Institute. During John's time as President, the AIIA has made real strides in achieving its vision of a nationwide grassroots organisation that brings together people who are passionate about international affairs. The AIIA has vastly expanded its communications and outreach, including the popular Australian Outlook blog, and its international standing was confirmed earlier this year when it was voted top think tank in Southeast Asia and the Pacific in the Global Go-To Think Tank Index published by the University of Pennsylvania. So I'd like to welcome John McCarthy.
Find what emerges rewarding and interesting. Just a few comments really, because the speeches have been made and they've been good, and I'm not sure that I'm going to add huge amounts to what has already been said, but I may just reflect a few of my own ideas and a few of my own prejudices and have a little bit of fun. First of all, though, I'd just like to say a couple of words about Kim. I feel fortunately very, very lucky to have someone of his stature and experience take my place in this particular role in the AIIA. He's a man who thinks deeply. He is a highly practiced politician, and he has now extensive experience in international relations. And I think we're very lucky that he has accepted this role. I think the fact that he has accepted this role does the organisation credit, but it's a great plus, and I think we will go from strength to strength. So that's, I think, the first point I want to make. I really just want to make a few observations about Australia and the world. They're not hugely profound. They may be interesting to some, but they really, I think, reflect ruminations that have occurred to me from time to time over the years when reflecting on Australian foreign policy, both from within Australia and, of course, looking at Australia from the outside. The first one is this, and I think some of you may have heard me say this before, but it is, I think, absolutely crucial to an understanding of Australia's external policies. And it's this. We are unique in that we are essentially a Western democracy based on the Westminster system, which has as its countries of immediate and most important foreign policy focus, with the exception of the United States, which is sui generis, and with the exception, I think, also of New Zealand and PNG, which have a particular position. But the countries we have as in our primary foreign policy focus are countries with civilizations, histories, religions, which are just simply quite different to ours. And that puts us in a very, very different position to other countries like us. It means we're different to Canada. We're different to, say, the Netherlands. We're different to the British. And it is really crucial to an understanding of the way that we look at the world and the world looks at us, to appreciate that difference. Australia is unique in foreign policy terms. And as an Australian diplomat, if you don't understand that, you won't get to first base. It is that crucial. That's the first point I want to make, and I think it comes out in two ways that are hugely important to our society. The first is this: it is the way in which we educate our people and our children. We simply have to do better in educating our community about those countries which surround us. We don't do it, or if we do it, we don't do it anything like well enough. These countries are just totally different. We have to understand them, and we don't. We've gone through periods where we've really tried. We have made a major effort to understand our environment better, particularly, I think, in the 70s. But we slip and we slide, and our attention focuses on something else, and we go back to nice holidays in Bali and the rest of it. We simply cannot afford, as a country, to continue in that vein. We really have to get serious about understanding the region in which we live. The second aspect of this particular dilemma, or this particular set of circumstances in which we find ourselves, is that we have to tell other countries about the sort of place we are, because we're different. We are just different. And that means we bring visitors here, we educate people here, we have active programs of public diplomacy. Do you realize that we spend about $12 million a year on public diplomacy? That the amount we spend on our entire foreign service is the same as the Canadians spend just on public diplomacy. The Germans and the French and the British spend 20 to 30 times as much on public diplomacy, on explaining their country, as we do. And we are the country that has to make this difference. We are the country upon which it is most incumbent to explain ourselves to our external environment. And we don't do it. Okay, second point is this. You will hear, going way back to the days of Tip O'Neill, the famous Speaker of the House of Representatives in the United States, the comment that all politics is local, and indeed it is, because the way we deal with each other, the way we deal with other countries is driven by local, domestic, political imperatives. Of course it is. But the paradox of current day international politics is that all politics is also now global. That is the difference to 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. All politics is local, or was local, still is, but all politics is also global. And unless we understand that, unless our governmental systems grasp that in all its dimensions, we must fall behind as a country, and we cannot afford to do that. The other factor that you often hear discussed in this country is the dilemma between choosing between China and choosing between the United States, I find that the wrong choice. That should never be the choice. The choice should always be what is in the interests of Australia. Sometimes it will be tilting towards our traditional allies, the United States. Sometimes our interests will lie in our dealings with China or with India or with any other country in the region. But we have to get away from this dilemma that we push ourselves into of saying, who do we go with? Who's got to be our best mate? Who's got to protect us? Who are we going to be safest with? You know, this is a historical issue in Australia, and it's time that we really grew out of it. And if you have grown up, as I have, in the Australian Foreign Service, it is something you are constantly aware of and constantly ashamed of. It is something we have to move beyond. One other point, and this is when we look at the region, and this too is crucial. We have, in the way we shape our mindset in thinking about the growth of China and where the United States fits into that growth and how the United States will protect us, and that's how we think a lot of the time, most of the time, from this growth. We think in terms of the relationships between those two countries and where we fit into it. There is a total misunderstanding that what is happening in the region is not just between two countries, it is a multipolar set of developments. And what happens in Japan bounces off India, and what bounces off India bounces off the United States, and what bounces off China bounces off India, and so on. So we cannot really grasp what we should be doing, what our policy should be in the region, unless we seek to comprehend what every other country is doing in the region and seek to comprehend it in depth and get sophisticated, really develop that understanding, because that, I think, is a bad mistake. Now, there are two other points that I'd like to make, and they basically, I suppose you could argue that they are points of principle. And when I argue about points of principle, I would not for one moment seek to suggest, because nobody would believe me, that I am a member of the the cappuccino set or the Chardonnay set or whatever happens to be in fashion, that I sort of sit around, cafes with a beret on and opine on life generally. It's not my style, but I think there are two aspects of principle that we need to bear in mind. And one goes back to a man for whom I have considerable admiration. He too has considerable admiration for the same person, and that's Gareth Evans. And I say that half in humour, but I actually mean it, because he is a man who has done an enormous amount for this country. But particularly, I go back to the dictum. I mean, he would drive you mad. It sounds like a Midwestern pastor, but he keeps talking about the importance of civilizational principles. And Gareth will go on at great length about good international citizenship. Well, there's something to it, because what goes around comes around. And if we behave in broadly principled way towards other countries, over the longer term, it tends to redound to our benefit. Now, it's a pity we've lost sight of that principle. And I think it's time we revived it. How it'll be revived, I don't know. I know there's one person around Australia who'd be pretty active, but it's got to be done. Now, coming back to principle, I come back to the subject that has essentially drained this country politically for the last decade. And that is the subject of refugees, boat people, illegal migrants. Call it what you will, or call them what you will, depending from the political perspective you come from, and so on. Every country has the right to protect its borders. Nobody should gainsay that for one moment. Equally, however, it is quite wrong and quite immoral and quite outrageous that those that call themselves political leaders, whom I prefer to call the elected political class, actually stimulate the dismay and the discord and the difficulties that have been caused to this country by our approach on the whole issue of refugees. Do anything you like to people smugglers, I have no problem. Kill them if you like, I don't care. But the fact of the matter is, we should not stimulate a political problem for ourselves which causes suffering for other people. And we have done that in a deliberate and consistent way. And both parties have done it, and I say this quite frankly, and the coalition have been the worst of the two. But they've both done it. They've both done it, and they're both guilty. And we've got to get away from it. Now, everybody has ideas on what we should do on this issue. But I think probably it has got so bad now, not just in our own area, but of course much more particularly in the Middle East and Europe, that it is time to look again at how we can build on the machinery of the 1951 Refugees Convention. There are people who think deeply about this issue, who know a huge amount about this issue. And there are people in countries who think like us, who think about this issue. If ever there was to be a major international initiative whose time has come, it's this one, and it's now. And Australia, if the politicians had the guts, and that's what really worries me, whether the politicians have the guts. If we really had the guts, we could do something about it. I fear, however, having witnessed the last 10 years, we may have shortcomings in that area. But at least there are a few people now on the horizon who might just be prepared to take that chance. On all these issues, if Australia doesn't meet these challenges, and I don't refer here just to the challenges of refugees and the challenges of people basically running for their lives, because that's what it's about. They're running for their lives because they're scared stiff they're going to be killed and their families are going to be killed. If we don't just pick up that challenge and pick up the other foreign policy challenges of being a essentially Western country surrounded by countries just simply think differently to us, I think the risk is, if I could quote an American poet, John Greenleaf Whittier, of all sad words of tongue and pen, the saddest of these, it might have been. That's it.
Thank you very much, John. Well, a wonderful outgoing President's remarks. Now, questions. Can I see any hands? John, you've stumped them. They don't know what to say. No questions? Here we have
So,
the first one.
Pat,
Patrick Moore.
that'll be short.
Can we get a second one lined up with the microphone?
I look forward to it, Pat. Yeah.
Where do you go into politics to solve these problems?
Right, you'll be number 2.
When I
Thank you.
get 30 years younger.
Is that the extent of the question? Right, okay, we're waiting for the microphone over there. Do we have a next one that I can be getting the microphone to? Somebody here? Oh,
Well,
somebody's pointing.
I've just been given a microphone because I had my hand up.
Here's
See me.
one over there. Good. Oh, you're there. Sorry, I thought it was
Right.
going over there.
Well, my name's Peter Jubb. I'm doing a PhD at the University of New South Wales in Canberra on international relations. What you've just said about building on the international conventions regarding refugees, I just wonder if you could elaborate on that a little bit. My understanding of what we have at the moment is we would be unlikely to get the present kind of refugee convention that we have. If we had to start from the beginning, countries would not support a convention that is as strong as it is. Isn't there a danger we could go the other way if we start put things on the table again? And how are we going to get international support for things that actually strengthen the rights and position of refugees rather than does the opposite?
Look, that's a very serious question, and you deserve a better answer than I'll probably be able to give you. But Erica Feller is going to be on a panel this afternoon, and she's effectively been the chief legal officer of the UNHCR for years, and she'll go into greater depth than much greater depth than I will be. The essential proposition I was making was this: if you try to reform the whole box and dice, it's going to fall apart, because politically it's not going to be easy to do. And that the way to approach it would essentially be to maintain what you have from 1951, which was protection of the type of refugees that existed in the post-World War II situation, and then incrementally see what can be done to look at these other situations involving human displacement in an incremental way. But you wouldn't be able to do it if you said, okay, we're going to have another international agenda, we're going to have another international treaty. Let's all sit down and these are the committees we're going to divide up. It wouldn't work. That's what the experts tell me. But there is some possibility, given the seriousness of the situation, that if you get a critical mass of international opinion that changes have to be made, it could be done in an incremental way. But I really do recommend to wait later in the day when there are several people here who are very good on this subject. It's I know I skipped the question, but you'll get a better answer. Yeah.
The person over there.
Hi, John. Caitlin Byrne, Bond University. Thank you for your speech. That was a great way of rounding out the first two speeches, I think. I wanted to pick up on one of the points the Foreign Minister raised about economic diplomacy as a focus for Australian foreign policy going forward, and then your point on public diplomacy, and see where the two meet. I guess my concern with economic diplomacy is that it raises the risk of Australia being seen as highly transactional. We're really in it for the money, for the next big contract. And I didn't hear the Foreign Minister really speak to the depth of the relationships we need to have in place for economic diplomacy to really work well and over the long term. So you've brought up public diplomacy, which is really about building those relationships. What would you like to see in this space?
Well, it's a good question, quite a lot is the answer. First, I hope I don't sound oversimplistic. First of all, straight economic diplomacy, you're basically advertising your wares. And you are advertising, and this is where public diplomacy comes in. You're basically not only advertising yourself as a country that makes good widgets, as until recently Germany was able to do, for example. You are basically saying this is a highly technically competent country that you would automatically look to if you're in the business of manufacturing whatever group of products. That's essentially why, for example, would you look to Holland or to Sweden or to Korea as a country to go to for manufacturing? And that a lot of that is public diplomacy as well as economic diplomacy, which is more, I would put more in the context of actual marketing. I think another aspect of economic diplomacy, which I think the Foreign Minister was referring to, was the work that is being put into the bilateral trade agreements and the TPP. That clearly is a form of multilateral economic diplomacy, which is increasingly moving into the place that was vacated by the WTO, or is being vacated by the WTO. But I come back to the fact, what we really don't do well in this country is public diplomacy. And it's a form of propaganda. One side, it is pure propaganda. Let's be frank about it. You're saying, we're great at doing this, we're really great at doing this, and the other guys aren't. Moving across to the exploitation of what, and this is, again, a very complicated subject in the sense everybody disagrees as to what's about, and that is soft power. How do we use the attractiveness of ourselves as a society to our own benefit? And one form of soft power would be, for example, the sort of soft power the Brits and, say, the Swedes have, as a country which is got a very, very high, highly regarded justice system, where you want to go to the law courts, where your broadcasting station is respected and believed. That's one type of soft power. The other is, the economic soft power of the sorts we've described. It's probably enough. I mean, I could go on a bit, but I probably said enough, I think.
John, Jeff Hart. Just a question on public diplomacy also, but perhaps drawing out a slightly different aspect. What was your value, or what was your assessment of the value of the programs that are obviously directed largely and projected by the ABC and Radio Australia, which were sort of slashed and virtually wiped out over the last sort of 3 or 4 years? I mean, do you think that sort of programming conveyed a sense of Australian values? It obviously conveyed information that people in our region wanted and utilised, but I mean, how good was it? Is that a basis to go back to?
Look, that is one of the forms of activity of public diplomacy. Others, which are hugely important, are visits. I mean, bringing people to the country, incredibly valuable. Scholarship's incredibly valuable. But in terms of broadcasting, I'd make the following comments. First of all, I think we made a serious mistake in cutting back on broadcasting, both television and radio, into the Pacific. I just really find that so unbelievably unwise as to almost defy comprehension. As to radio and television into Southeast Asia, it varies a lot. The value varies a lot according to the country. It is actually it has been quite well regarded in Indonesia in the past. The further away you get from Australia, probably the less attention is paid to it. So, I think it's probably an area which, by the nature of things, most countries are beginning to move out of, except those that have had highly developed television channels that are really very effective and into which they put a great deal of money. Russians, Germans, the BBC. BBC is quintessentially good and really valuable. All that, very, very important. But, a lot of it doesn't get very far. and a lot of it probably could be better spent elsewhere. And here you move into this whole area of social media, which embassies, governments, companies are all doing. I'm afraid, that's sort of not something I would regard myself as having any real expertise. A comment that I think the AIIA will endorse fully. But it is that area is where we, I think, lost opportunities through all those cutbacks in the ABC. And if we'd maintained all this, when we started doing this 20, 22, 25 years ago, and we continued without chopping and changing the whole time, which we did, we were ahead of the BBC at one stage, not for very long, and we didn't put the money into it, but we could have, and we could have had a huge impact on the region. But this is not an area where Australia is imaginative. It simply isn't.
We've got time for one more question. Is that Ian? Yeah.
I'm Ian Lincoln.
Yeah.
We're roughly the 12th wealthiest country in the world. We spend roughly the 12th largest amount on defence, but only the 24th on diplomacy.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it would be very hard to persuade most Australians that we should double that amount. So is it the case that perhaps our public diplomacy effort needs to be directed also to our own population?
Yeah. The answer is yes. There should be much more done to explain what actually embassies do and what our foreign policies and our trade policies do for the benefit of the population. At the easy end of the spectrum, there is getting people out of jail. They understand that. Understand getting into it even easier, but that's something that all in the game. The more I think that you charge people for doing this, the better. Nothing like costing you $500 or $600 to get a consular call to curb your enthusiasm a bit. Anyway, so there should be more of that. But in explaining what our foreign policy does for the country, a lot more could be done. Part of the problem, and foreign ministers will always tell you this, is they find it very hard to pick up a constituency, because a lot of what they talk about people don't really care about unless it affects them directly. If it's a tsunami or a consular issue, trade they understand. But the broader aspects of foreign policy are harder to explain. But it comes down again and again and again to one word: it's leadership. These blokes and ladies are elected to lead. They're not elected to be elected officials. And until we get that somewhere in the Australian psyche, we're not going to do very well, I don't think. Hopefully we are entering into a cycle, because there are people on the horizon who I would call leaders or potential leaders. Regrettably, there are a great deal more who would not fall into that category. What basically has to happen, and look, I'm just Joe Blow on this, everybody has their own view, is that the ratio of leaders to non-leaders has to alter very radically. Now, how you pull that trick off in Australia, well, I don't know. But there are lots of suggestions that have been made, including salary, and it's really, at the end of the day, it is the satisfaction of leading a country that has huge potential if only the right people say, let's take it in this direction. Let's not just, essentially find ourselves retreating into the depths of tedium and mediocrity, because that's the other way you can go. It's all prejudices according to me. I mean, nothing particularly profound.
John, we wish you could stay there forever to keep answering with your bon mot of where we should be. But thank you very much on behalf of us all.